Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are expected to meet for a summit in the next few days to discuss a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. Israel's Security Cabinet is about to meet as Benjamin Netanyahu pushes for a full-scale occupation of the Gaza Strip. The UK government unveils plans to crack down on risky cosmetic procedures like Botox injections carried out by unqualified staff. The Bank of England cuts the cost of borrowing to 4% despite predictions of a sharp rise in inflation. The Governor, Andrew Bailey, speaks to our economics editor about where the economy is heading.
So I think the path is downwards. I think, if you like to stretch the metaphor a bit, I think the course is a bit more uncertain, frankly.
And the first migrants are detained as part of the government's new agreement with France, which means they can be sent back across the English Channel. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. The Kremlin says there'll be a summit in the next few days between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to discuss a possible ceasefire deal in Ukraine. It will be the first time the two men have held face-to-face talks for 7 years, and it comes after President Trump gave Russia an ultimatum to stop the fighting or face new economic sanctions from tomorrow. The White House has said no date or location has yet been set for a meeting. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, has this report.
All smiles in Moscow as US presidential envoy Steve Witkoff held 3 hours of talks with Vladimir Putin. The aim, to steer Russia towards a ceasefire in Ukraine before new US sanctions are imposed on Friday. Mr. Witkoff is a frequent and welcome visitor to Russia. But the question is, will this lead to a repeat of this? The last Trump-Putin summit was 7 years ago, before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now that war is raging, and Russia is resisting calls for a full ceasefire. The two sides, Russia and Ukraine, both have demands unacceptable to the other. The exchange of POWs is the only thing achieved so far by peace talks. Meanwhile, the death toll continues to rise. India's economy is reeling this week from America's 50% trade tariffs, punishment for India buying Russia's oil. Donald Trump has hinted China could be next for these so-called secondary sanctions. Earlier, President Trump ordered 2 US Navy submarines to move closer to Russia as a warning, but the move was seen as largely performative. Both Putin and Trump want to normalize US-Russia relations, but Trump has signaled impatience with Putin's refusal to compromise. It's possible the two leaders will meet in Istanbul as early as next week. What's less likely is there will be any breakthrough in ending the war in Ukraine. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Well, let's speak live to John Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine and senior director at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Thank you so much for being here on the programme. So, potentially a face-to-face meeting, your assessment of that?
Well, this is a Putin ploy to dissuade Trump from proceeding with additional sanctions on Russia. That's the game. And he knows that Trump is unhappy with Putin's obstructing of peace in Ukraine. So he's suggesting, well, let's have a meeting. And they apparently provided some sort of proposal for a ceasefire or a partial ceasefire to Witkoff, which is going to be now being studied in Washington, which will be something short of an actual ceasefire. And again, Putin is hoping this will prevent Trump from bringing the hammer down on the Russian economy.
So in your view, again, Putin is playing Trump?
He's trying very hard. The question is, will he? There was a story that was published late last night, which quoted a senior American official anonymously saying that the sanctions were going to proceed. If that's true, and I hope it is, then Putin's not very successful in this latest attempt to play Trump. But if it does succeed and we have no sanctions tomorrow, Putin will think he's escaped yet another problem with the American president and paid no real price for it.
There are a number of obvious worries. One of them, in terms of Europe, in terms of Ukraine themselves, is if we get to a stage where it's a one-on-one meeting with Putin and Trump, that somehow something might be agreed between those two. and pressured then on Kyiv. That's a real concern, isn't it?
I understand that concern. I actually don't think that's likely, at least not now, because unless he comes away with a clear Russian commitment to a full ceasefire, and he turns around and starts to pressure Zelensky, that makes Trump look like a true patsy for Putin, and he does not want that image. So I don't think that will happen. But I do think it's possible that the strong policy Trump has been advocating roughly for the last 2 months may prove to be not as strong because Putin has persuaded Trump from, again, moving hard on sanctions. That, to me, is the more likely danger, although even that danger may not materialize.
Are you surprised that the White House, Washington, has not pulled the levers that it could have pulled so far?
I would not use the word surprised. I would use the word I'm disappointed. But, it's taken Trump a while to see what people who understand the Kremlin well known for months, that Putin has no interest in a peace in Ukraine. And so Trump has moved in the right direction, but he has yet to pull the trigger and actually do something strong against the Kremlin for this. Well, actually, to correct that, he did something strong yesterday when he did put the sanctions on India, but that's only good if it's followed by more comprehensive steps tomorrow.
There are so many different permutations of what could happen, and I accept that, but
Yes.
One of them is that somehow Putin and Trump agree something that Kyiv don't want to sign up to. Is there a realistic possibility, you think, of Ukraine continuing or trying to continue to fight this on their own, perhaps with just Europe backing and not the Americans?
The answer is absolutely yes, because the alternative is submission to a regime that has as a goal not just seizing political control of Ukraine, including a lot more territory, but the extinction of Ukrainian identity in the areas of Ukraine that it does control. So the fate of Ukraine under the Russian boot would be truly dreadful. Think of the Uyghurs
We've got
in China.
Yes, we've several times got close to what looks like a pivotal moment. How important do you think this moment is? And if it is missed an opportunity to get a ceasefire, what do you anticipate then?
I think this is a very important opportunity. I think Trump has gotten Putin's attention. But if Trump allows Putin to play him, and I'm not saying that will happen, that doesn't mean the end of the game, because Trump will still face the same headwinds that he faced in April and May when he began to talk about Russia obstructing and he did nothing. And those headwinds will return, perhaps with greater force. And we could find Trump then inching towards a similar point of pressure on Putin 2 or 3 months down the line, because he looks foolish since after having allowed Putin to escape sanctions this week, the situation which caused Trump to talk about sanctions has not disappeared. Trump cannot walk away from his stated policy goal of achieving a durable peace in Ukraine without losing reputation, without losing any sense that he's a strong foreign policy leader.
John Hope, great to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Now, as promised, let's turn to that other major story that is going to develop in the next couple of hours, because Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting his security cabinet around now to ask them to approve his plan for a full-scale occupation of the Gaza Strip. Let's go live to Jerusalem and our correspondent Hugo Bachega. And Hugo, already Benjamin Netanyahu has given an interview and some important lines and detail emerging about what he wants to actually push through. Just bring our audience right up to date.
Yeah, Matthew, very interesting that the Prime Minister has decided ahead of this meeting to give an interview to an American news network, Fox News, in English. So I think he's trying here to explain what is behind this very controversial plan in Israel, and a plan that, if it goes ahead, will be heavily criticized by many of Israel's allies, allies that have been urging Israel to strike a deal with Hamas and end the war. And here we're talking about the possibility of an expansion of the war. So the Prime Minister said that the goals here are to reassure Israel's security, remove Hamas from Gaza, enable the population of Gaza to be free, and then he said that the idea here is to pass Gaza to civilian governance that is not Hamas. So I think here he's trying to not only explain his goals, his plans in Gaza, but also to reject the idea that Israel is trying to occupy Gaza on a permanent basis, or even annex Gaza. And obviously, the Prime Minister is supported by, some radical members, ministers who have been not only, in favor of the idea of occupying Gaza, but also of expelling the population of Gaza and resettling Gaza with Jews. So there has been, concern about the real intentions here of this plan. Concerns also from the military leadership. We know that there was a meeting earlier this week in which the chief of staff of the military warned the Prime Minister that fully occupying Gaza would be a trap. He talked about the dangers of expanding the military operation in Gaza, that this would endanger the lives of soldiers and also the hostages who remain in captivity. And there have been concerns about the Palestinian population, and also that any kind of expansion of military operations in Gaza could worsen the catastrophic humanitarian situation there.
And briefly, Hugo, the working assumption must be that Donald Trump has, in effect, said to Benjamin Netanyahu, you can do this, because otherwise it is most unlikely he would do it off his own bat.
Exactly, and there have been multiple reports in the last few days essentially suggesting that President Trump has given Israel the green light to do whatever he wants to do militarily in Gaza. The president seems to be very much focused on the humanitarian situation. It seems that the Americans are working on a plan to expand, the distribution sites of the very controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is very much in charge now of, delivering aid to Palestinians. But there is, internally in Israel, a lot of opposition to the government's plans, with polls suggesting that the vast majority of the public are in favor of a deal and for the war to end.
Hugo Pacheco, thanks very much. And as Hugo was saying, Benjamin Netanyahu giving that interview to an American news organisation. Let me just give you a couple of the lines that have already emerged. He has said that Israel intends to take control of all of Gaza. We want to hand it over to the armed forces that will govern Gaza properly. And then goes on to say, we don't want to keep Gaza. We want a security perimeter. But the obvious question is, once they are in, with total control, just how long they actually stay. So some of the detail beginning to emerge. As I say, that cabinet meeting we think is underway already. So we will continue to update you as more detail emerges from that. But you heard Hugo talk about the humanitarian considerations. Let's speak now to Caroline Williman, who's an MSF project coordinator in Gaza. Thank you for being here on the programme. Let me ask you, first of all, if we see an expansion of the Israeli military operation, what is the likely impact on your work, the humanitarian side?
I mean, in all honesty, it seems unfathomable to me that we need to imagine a situation that can get even worse than the total apocalypse in which we find ourselves already. And it would become extremely difficult, if not potentially impossible, for us to function, given the number of difficulties we already face in the current situation. If there is an intensification even further of hostilities, our work will become extremely difficult, if not impossible.
So you think already it is an apocalyptic situation that could get even worse?
I've been here 6 weeks and I called it apocalyptic from day one and dystopian from day one. And 6 weeks ago, I could not have imagined that now it is already so much worse than it was on the first day that I entered here. So while I don't want to believe it can get worse than this, unfortunately, the reality is that yes, this could happen. It's many, many months that we tell ourselves we have never seen a situation like this. We have never seen anything, a humanitarian situation like this. And every time it got worse.
Tell me a little of what you are currently able to do. And you said in your first answer, you will have to make a judgment whether you can continue to operate. So do you anticipate, if this is green-lit from the Israeli Security Cabinet and we see an enhancement of all those military aspects in the next few days, at what stage do you think you will have to make a decision whether to stay or go?
I mean, obviously, we will be assessing continuously whether the security of our teams can be assured, knowing that in any case, this is a highly, highly insecure context already as it is. Then let's not forget that my Palestinian colleagues have been doing this work throughout genocide for 22 months. They have continued to deliver. So we are absolutely committed to stay. But we anticipate if this plan comes into action, that our work will become even more difficult than it is already.
Just give me a final thought then about levels of starvation that you are seeing and what you are able to do or not able to do.
So we run a primary healthcare center here in Gaza City, where I'm based. The number of patients on our malnutrition program has increased 5-fold since May. These are children younger than 5 years old and pregnant and lactating women. We screen all of the people in these groups when they enter our clinic. 25% of them are malnourished. And also the reason why so many of them while the number of people in that program keeps increasing, is because simply we cannot discharge them from the program. There is not enough food for them to get better, to gain the necessary weight for them to be discharged from the program. So we witness really in what is just a primary healthcare center. We're not in the front line for the most sick, the most malnourished, but we see every day the consequences of the hunger crisis.
And you're all having to deal with that on a human level every single day. When you get to the end of the day, just give me an idea of emotionally, on a human level, what that's like.
I mean, once again, I think again and again, I come back to the fact that my Palestinian colleagues have been doing this for 22 months. At the same time, yes, I cannot deny that it is devastating, and we lose words to describe what we are seeing here in the last few weeks. We passed some time with some hope for a ceasefire, and it is again unfathomable to think that not only we lost that hope at the moment for a ceasefire, but we are looking not at a status quo, but a deterioration and a status quo of a situation that is already unbearable. My colleagues are hungry. My colleagues sleep in a tent when they go home after work. Still, they continue doing this work, so we will do the same. But to have to imagine that this will get more difficult rather than that it will become a little bit more bearable is extremely difficult.
Well, Caroline, we are extremely grateful for you taking your time, just explaining, describing live for us on BBC News. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll have more here in just a moment, but around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Now, the Bank of England has cut interest rates today by 1/4 of a percentage point to 4%, bringing the cost of borrowing to its lowest level for more than 2 years. Its governor, Andrew Bailey, says it's been a finely balanced decision that any future cuts would need to be made gradually and carefully. The move will reduce monthly mortgage costs for some homeowners, but it also means smaller returns for savers. Well, our economics editor, Faisal Islam, has been speaking to the governor of the Bank of England.
Governor, so a cut in interest rates, but also a message that inflation still has some way to go and concerns about food prices as well.
Yes, it's a finely balanced decision. You're absolutely right, Faisal. So we've seen a small uptick in inflation beyond what we expected. We've been expecting for some time to see some uptick, nothing like what we saw in previous years, by the way. We don't think that will persist, but we have to watch this very carefully. So that's one side of the, if you like, the sort of the balance sheet. On the other side, we've seen, I think, some further softening in the labour market, for instance. So we're having to watch that very carefully as well. Because obviously that could feed through to inflation coming down a bit faster. So we've got risks on both sides at the moment. So it is finely balanced.
So would you judge that the inflation we're seeing, 3.6%, heading up to 4%, again, driven by those food prices, that is a temporary, transitory phenomenon, and therefore you can cut? Is that the argument?
Well, we have to do two things when we take these decisions. One is that, of course, we have to be forward-looking because we influence what inflation is going to be in the future. So we have to look at future conditions. And secondly, the important thing is the context. Now, I think the context is one of some softening, particularly in the labour market, going on. So that is, if anything, probably going to relieve pressures a bit. But we also have to be very focused on whether we will get some persistence from this inflation. Now, and by the way, of course, this affects, I'm very conscious this affects cost of living. Food is a particularly important issue here because, for those on the lowest incomes, food has a larger share of their consumption because it's the essentials of life. So again, we have to be very focused on this. The underlying stories behind food inflation are quite varied. There's quite a few of them. It's not a single story, actually, by any means. There's things in various bits of the landscape, various bits of commodities going on. We've had some weather impacts in some overseas countries. We've had some crop failures, with all these things going on. Now, I think the textbook would tell you these things are temporary. And we're actually already seeing some of these prices already sort of beginning to adjust back. We have to actually see it happen, though.
There are some divides in the committee. You face with your own deputy governor and chief economist.
Yes.
Is that a little bit awkward, or does it show that it's a tough, difficult to judge moment?
Well, I think it shows a number of things. Yes, it shows it's a finely balanced situation. First of all, I am very strongly committed to the process. It's a very, very serious process of deliberation. I always say to my colleagues on the committee, you should express the views you have. There's no constraints in this situation. We did that very much as we always do. And I respect the views of my colleagues very much. It was very finely balanced, but I think that's really a reflection of the times we're in.
And to be clear, markets have interpreted today's move as saying, well, maybe there isn't definitely going to be a further rate cut this year. Is that right? Is the path definitely still downwards?
So I think the path is downwards. I think, if you like to stretch the metaphor a bit, I think the course is a bit more uncertain, frankly. So, in other words, what do I mean by that? Well, the timing, whether we'll be cutting at this meeting or that meeting. And I think you see that in markets. I think markets are also reflecting their pricing, the fact there is genuine uncertainty, and that reflects the fact it's a finely balanced decision. So I think that's probably, for the moment, the right place to be.
Andrew Bailey talking there to Faisal Islam. Now, rescue teams have resumed efforts to reach an India's tourist town in the Himalayas that saw flash flooding on Tuesday. Officials say 4 people are confirmed dead and more than 100 remain missing. Weeks of heavy rain have made roads leading up to the site impassable in some places, with landslides and boulders blocking the roads. Well, our South Asia correspondent Samira Hussain is in the badly hit state in northern India.
There is one main roadway that leads to Dharauli, which is where the flash floods have happened. And you can see that we've actually come to the end of the road, the bridge that used to be here that would connect the two sides has been completely washed away. And even now we're hearing sounds of thunder. You can see that there are some rain clouds up ahead, and it just demonstrates just how unstable the weather is and how much more difficult it is for rescue officials to be able to get the much needed help up to that village. So right now, the only way that help is getting to Darali and to the people there is by helicopter. And so the Indian Army is flying people up, dropping them off, dropping supplies, and then coming back and doing that over and over again. In terms of understanding the true scale of the devastation, until more officials are able to cross over and get to that site, it's going to remain unclear.
Samira Hussein, before we break, let me show you the live pictures coming into us, because we were talking about that Israeli Security Cabinet meeting going on. These are the pictures from outside of that meeting, hostage families there gathering to make very clear they are so unhappy about what is being considered a full takeover of the Gaza Strip, with 20 hostages still being held by Hamas who are believed to be alive. So those the latest pictures. We'll have the latest on that story here in about 15 minutes. Next up, though, it's time for business.
Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. Business Today.
A new era for global trade. Sweeping US tariffs take effect on more than 60 nations, covering most of America's trading partners. But who will end up footing the bill? Economists warn US consumers will pay for the president's policies, but one US manufacturer tells us they're exactly what is needed. And the fierce debates over UK rates. The Bank of England cuts the cost of borrowing, but high inflation casts doubts on future cuts. Plus, a growing presence online. Farmers take to social media to raise awareness of how our food is produced. Welcome, this is Business Today. I'm Ben Thompson, and we're going to start in the United States. That's where President Trump's plan to shake up global trade has stepped up a gear this Thursday after new import taxes took effect on goods from most of America's trading partners. Well, tariff rates vary by country between 10 and 50%, but the overall effective tariff rate on imports into the US is at least 18%. That's according to economists at the Yale Budget Lab. That is the highest rate in nearly a century. Well, as the new tariffs took effect at midnight Eastern Time in the United States, President Trump boasted on Truth Social that his government is now taking in billions of dollars in taxes. But many economists warn it is US businesses and consumers who will pay the price.
Well, they're already starting to feel it. Despite the headlines about the delayed reaction, I think the new data that have come in the last week have shown pretty clearly that prices where the tariffs have gone up have started to rise. So prices are going up. Jobs are going down. Payrolls are going down. Growth is slowing. So it's starting to kick in, and it's going to intensify in the next 6 months if these tariffs stay around.
Of course, for President Trump, tariffs aren't just about bringing in tax revenue. They're also about rebalancing what he sees as unfair trading relationships and encouraging more manufacturing in the United States. Erin Delmore has been speaking to the boss of one company. It's called World Dryers. They've been benefiting and they fully support the president's policy.
We're like the poster child for what President Trump is trying to do, help small American businesses thrive domestically and help export more internationally.
How specifically is your company benefiting from tariffs?
We're basically 100% sourced and manufactured in the United States. So we are not feeling the effects of increased costs on materials or delayed shipments of materials. And we've been able to hold our pricing against all of our competitors, which have had to raise their pricing due to tariffs. So it's significantly helping us.
And tell me how your company is doing now versus 6 months ago or a year ago.
So we are doing much better this year versus last year, up, I would say, almost 20%. And another benefit of the tariffs, as we are sold globally, is the reduction of tariffs into other countries, which has been a significant barrier for an American-made product in several regions we sell in.
Do you mind if I ask if you voted for President Trump?
Sure, I did. One of the major reasons was because of our American manufacturing business and knew that he would be a better president for us.
Well, on Wall Street, shares have made a strong start despite the major escalation in tariffs. So why does it seem investors are shrugging off any concerns for now? Let's talk to Michelle, who's in New York. And Michelle, that's a real issue, isn't it? Questions here about, well, frankly, the market's higher. They're being driven by tech stocks higher, and that's because potentially they may get some key exemptions.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have been waiting for is what would happen to chips, semiconductors that are imported into the United States. And during a press conference alongside the boss of Apple, Donald Trump said that 100% tariffs were on the way, but that companies, including Apple, would be exempt if they invested in America. And so there is a huge sigh of relief this morning from investors who feel like the major tech companies, given the fact that they are all building data centers and other other manufacturing facilities here will therefore be able to skirt around this and sidestep this. And so you're seeing the NASDAQ kind of moving higher. And I think perhaps the one exception to that, Ben, this morning is Intel.
Yes, talking about Intel, an interesting one here. President Trump demanding the resignation of Intel's boss. This is over his investments in Chinese firms. But the boss hasn't been in that job very long, has he?
5 months, so not long at all. Look, I mean, on the one hand, you know, this is a company that has been trying to build manufacturing facilities in America, but its attempt had been foundering, and we saw the exit of Pat Gelsinger, the former CEO, kind of leaving, stepping aside for Mr. Tan to come in as the CEO just 5 months ago. He was previously on the board, he'd been vetted by the company, but now you've got these allegations that he has ties to China, and we think that is what prompted Donald Trump's post on social media this morning. I mean, take a step back for a moment, though, and just consider sort of how extraordinary this is. The president essentially trying to backseat drive how a company is run. I think that will send a chilling effect. We've seen it perhaps once before when he publicly criticised the CEO of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan, over debanking, sort of not providing banking services to conservatives. And here, once again, you're seeing sort of a CEO being targeted by the president, involving himself on sort of matters that really are far more at a corporate level.
Yes, keep an eye on that for us, Michelle. But for now, thank you, Michelle Fleury there in New York. John Denton is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. That's the world's largest representative business organisation. John, good to have you here. And I want to pick up on some of the things Michelle was talking to us about tariffs. But give me your assessment of what today means for you right now.
Well, there's no clarity still whether what's weighing on business globally, unless you know we're in 170 countries, is the uncertainty. Yes, there's a series of arrangements that have been entered into, which do provide some improvement on where we were. But at the same time, there's fundamental questions that are yet to be asked. If you're in Southeast Asia, what does transshipment actually look like? Is it 40%, 50%, 70% of the goods that need to be determined, and what will be the rate? What is going to happen on de minimis? There's all these issues that are still outstanding. So the real drag here is actually not the effect of the tariffs directly, it's actually the effect of the uncertainty. And you see that even playing out in the US with the July job numbers coming through, quite disappointing, I think, from many perspectives. So all signs at the moment show that companies are doing their best to absorb the uncertainty, but we're seeing consequences of that. And more importantly, the indicators are starting to become a little clearer about the pressure that may come on the US in terms of growth prospects as well.
Yes, and so while everyone waits for clarity, what they do know is that there's this effective 18% or so levy on imports into the United States. What does that mean? What does it do day to day to business?
Well, it's actually curious in a way. I've just been in Southeast Asia. I've been in Jakarta, I've been in Singapore and Bangkok. And of course, the big issue there was relative tariffs. I mean, at 18%, or the 19% or 20%, it's complicated. But so long as your competitor directly doesn't have an improved position, you can probably absorb that or make it work, or see it as a one-time cost adjustment. However, the variability that's playing around still is actually causing people to consider, well, do you actually make that investment? Do you actually allocate that additional funds? Do you put a data center here? All these sorts of issues are running around.
John, really good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us. We'll talk again, I'm sure, but John Denton there at the International Chamber of Commerce. Now, here in the UK, despite concerns around stubborn inflation, the Bank of England has cut interest rates for the 5th time since last August. The bank lowering that rate by 0.25% to 4%. It's the lowest in around 2 years. But the decision was close fought. Policymakers were unable to agree after a first round of voting. Well, with the details, here's Darshini David.
From prisons to sports pitches, there's no shortage of custom for this steel fence maker in Wolverhampton. But lead design engineer Adam also has to safeguard his own finances. With his 5-year fixed mortgage deal expiring, he faces higher repayments.
It's a bit of a jump, so it's gone up from about £900 to just over £1,000. So yeah, just slightly over 10% increase. But we thought it was going to be more like a £200-300 increase. but luckily we were able to find a good deal.
The issue for Adam and many others is that despite recent cuts, rates remain higher than a few years ago. His boss too is trying to nail things down as the company faces hurdles to its own finances and plans.
For a company of our size with 60 employees, the combined effect was around about £120,000 in the year, which is a big hit for us. Partly because a lot of our competition is foreign-based, so we're trying to manufacture in the UK, but we're fighting against companies in Turkey, China, who probably haven't had those sort of increases. So it's a constant battle to become more and more efficient, almost just to stand still.
So the bank faces a dilemma. Its primary job is to get inflation down to the 2% target and keep it there. But it's currently 3.6%. It may remain around that level for some time. On the other hand, it's got to be mindful of the wider economy. And it's particularly being concerned about the jobs market. Unemployment is at a 4-year high of 4.7%. Many businesses are claiming that higher taxes and other policies are having an effect there. And it's those concerns about the wider economy and the longer-term implications for inflation that swung the bank's decision today.
At this meeting, the Monetary Policy Committee judged that a further 0.25 percentage points reduction in bank rate was appropriate. Based on the outlook for inflation, a gradual and careful approach to the further withdrawal of monetary policy restraint remains appropriate.
The bank's decision will give a lift to businesses and some mortgage holders, although it will weigh heavily on savers. And as uncertainty over our prospects continue, it may be a while until we see rates being trimmed again.
Darshini David. Now, farmers across Britain have taken to social media to share a typical day in British agriculture, part of a nationwide campaign called 24 Hours in Farming. Well, earlier I spoke to Rebecca Wilson. She comes from a long line of farmers and told me the idea is to connect consumers with farmers and educate more about where their food comes from.
It's the largest digital campaign, which it is really, really important for me that it's digital. So many people have phones in their pockets, but perhaps they've never been on a farm. So to be able to make that connection between farmers and consumers, for me, it is vital. And you'll see farmers who don't usually post on social media using that hashtag Farm24, just trying to showcase what we really do behind the scenes to produce food. I'm in the tractor at the moment, and I'm not sure if you can see the big trailer behind me, but one of the first jobs we were doing this morning is bringing the straw in from the fields. We'll store that and use that for sheep bedding over winter, and then, all being well, fingers crossed for the weather, we'll be harvesting, so combining some wheat later on in the day if the sun gets out.
If the sun gets out. More on all those stories, bbc.com/business. But that is your business today. See you soon.
The BBC was always on in the Mashiri house, and my dream actually was to be a BBC News presenter. I want to be for others what the BBC was for us, a trusted source of stability and hope. For me, trust is about presence, about fostering relationships all around the world over years. So when a story breaks, we're not chasing a lead, we're already there. I'm Marianne Mashiri on The World Today for BBC News.
Welcome back to Verified Live, and let me bring you breaking news straight away, because that Israeli cabinet meeting has got underway. We have just been told that Israeli military saying that meeting of the Security Cabinet to discuss the plans for the military in Gaza has begun. So we're anticipating also Benjamin Netanyahu talking and doing an interview before that meeting started, saying they do want to fully occupy the Gaza Strip, intimating that it wasn't for an extended long-term period, talking about giving control over ultimately to Arab countries. That is interesting, which we shall flesh out when I talk to Hugo Bachega a little later. But certainly that is the plan, to take control of Gaza, and talking about also wanting to build a security perimeter. So exactly what we had anticipated, with many people alarmed at the intensification, the escalation from Israel. We showed you briefly those pictures, so I'll show you them again, because these are pictures of families of the hostages who are still being held, demonstrating because they are against this move. They've been saying openly they think it puts the hostages still being held in further danger, further jeopardy. But those demonstrations going on as that Security Cabinet begins its meeting. As I said, I will talk to Hugo Bachega here on the programme in about 10 minutes' time, so do stay with us for more on that story. Let's turn to our other important story here today, because the Kremlin has said there will be a summit in the next few days between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to discuss a possible ceasefire deal in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, however, has dismissed the possibility of talks with Ukraine's President Zelensky directly, saying conditions have not yet been met. Well, a little earlier on the programme, I spoke to Melinda Herring, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre, who told me more about what she made of that potential announcement and meeting.
I think that everything sort of revolves around next week. Will it be a meeting between Putin and Trump? And will there be a ceasefire? Or is Trump just going to give him a meeting as a gift? And will Zelensky be involved? So there's a lot of open questions. But I agree with all your correspondents. Moscow hasn't had to give very much in the past day or so.
The other element to this is the possibility that it is classic textbook Putin. You remember back in early May, Starmer, Macron, Merz all went to Kyiv. They threatened a huge package of sanctions if Russia didn't sign up to a ceasefire on the Monday. He then offered up direct talks with Ukraine, and that delayed everything. We are 3 months later and not an inch further forward. We could be seeing rinse and repeat of that tactic, couldn't we?
Absolutely, Matthew. And that's the real danger and the real worry. And I think it's important to highlight what's happening to Ukrainians. So the BBC just did a terrific report, and it looked at the number of rocket and drone strikes in the last 6 months. There's been more than 27,000 rockets and drones that have hit Ukraine. And that's almost a threefold increase to what we saw in the last 6 months of Biden's administration. It's not a political point, but you can see that the Russians have really increased the pressure on civilians, and they've managed to double the amount of ballistic rockets that they're making, and also increase the drone production in Russia itself. So the pressure is really being felt among civilians in Ukraine.
In terms of the tariffs threat to Russia that is supposed to come in tomorrow, it's odd, isn't it? Because, again, that may or may not happen. We've seen the jump in tariffs to India for buying Russian oil, but not China that buys more of it. It's sort of odd strategy, isn't it?
So go back and look at that executive order. It does open the door for sanctions on others. So the White House feels like it has the ability to push India, but not China, and to leave the threat open. I think that's what the Trump administration, that's their thinking. But the Trump administration has the ability to increase pressure on Russia. It could sanction Russia itself more deeply. It could enforce existing sanctions. There's a number of sanctions on the books that it's not enforcing well. But I think they're opening the door to increasing pressure. And we saw that yesterday when President Trump spoke. He threatened to do more sanctions as well.
A twin final thought then. Why has he not used those obvious levers before? And if this round of direct talks fails, what do you anticipate happens then?
So I think Trump wanted to give Putin a good faith attempt for the first 6 months of his administration. Is it what most people would have done? No. But Trump is a different kind of president, and there is some benefit to that. He has more flexibility than an ideological American president. It hasn't worked, and I think he has seen the light. We know that Melania Trump is telling him constantly about the bombings of civilians. If this round fails, then I think Plan B is Europe, and we see Europe already standing up. Donald Trump did do something quite significant in the last month. He announced that Europe could buy American weapons, and we've seen major commitments from more than 4 different European governments. So I think the burden is going to fall on Europe to continue to supply the weapons to Ukraine.
Melinda Herring talking to me a little earlier here on BBC News.
We've all grown up being told that education empowers us. And if you study at school, then you're going to get the rewards. I'm gonna shine a light on the world's billion-dollar secret.
This is a film about how African graduates are being used by students predominantly living in the global north to cheat on their academic qualifications.
You wrote about 2 completely different things for 2 completely different masters in the space of 12 hours.
Oxford University professor Dr. Patricia Kingori goes in search of those in her birthplace of Kenya who are paid to write essays and theses for those in more privileged places. Although it's not the only place in the world where this happens, Kenya is a global hub. Young Kenyans are shown working round the clock in this gig economy, accepting offers of work either through intermediaries or directly, using VPN technology to hide their locations. Their faces have been changed using AI technology to protect them. The reason why so many are willing to do this work is partly due to unemployment at home, according to the film's director, Londoner Eloise King.
Almost 1 million students graduate each year and can't find jobs, and there are high unemployment rates. You have a very educated population who can't find work necessarily in what are considered to be legitimate industries.
This is a British film, and in fact it's the British colonial legacy that is partly responsible for Kenya being such a global hub for this kind of industry. The British Empire imposed its education system and the English language upon Kenya until it gained independence in 1963. And speaking English as a first language is very important because a lot of the students who are cheating are at universities in the Anglosphere. Sky-high tuition fees in some countries mean further education is already big business. This marketplace is also estimated by the filmmakers to be worth around $15 billion to the global economy. But those who cheat don't always fit a privileged, lazy stereotype.
The demand for this work is increasingly high because the demand for education is increasingly sort of necessary to get a good job. So I think by and large, people are, if you would use the word privileged, insofar that they are able to access the finances to pay for the work to being done. But I was aware of it being done by students of all different sort of ethnicities.
And although fees can be as low as $1 an hour, King argues that those we meet in the film, such as Mercy, a young Kenyan mother bringing up her daughter Angel, are not always exploited.
I think by their own testimony, they're getting out of it the, access to knowledge and information. So on the one hand, there is an industry in which they're unable to progress into the careers they might want to directly, but this does put food on their tables. They're able to earn independent incomes. It was particularly, we noted, beneficial for single mothers because they were able to be their own bosses.
If the Kenyans were writing as themselves and getting those opportunities, it would completely reshape the world.
How AI will yet affect this industry, indeed the whole of academia, is another subject. But what really struck me about this film is it shows the unfairness that some can get bogus qualifications and a step up the career ladder, while others are shut out of opportunities they deserve.
It feels like a ticking time bomb.
One of the only advantages of being the old guy is that I've known every major world leader in the last 30 years, and I've known them personally.
There's a thrill in not necessarily following a straight line, do you know what I mean? Trying things that are different, challenging myself.
I'm an optimist. I'm always believing that anything can be done if you have the will to do it and if you have a clear vision.
Women are still judged by a different metric than men, and certainly judged by a different metric when they do something wrong.
I will continue on with a life of public service, so I will always support the charities and the people that mean so much to me.
When the big names talk, they talk to us.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting now as Benjamin Netanyahu pushes for a full-scale occupation of the Gaza Strip.
I'll have the latest from Jerusalem as the Prime Minister's plan faces opposition even from the military leadership.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are expected to meet for a summit in the next few days to discuss a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. We'll have the latest from our correspondents live in Ukraine and live in Washington. Also on the programme. The Bank of England cuts the cost of borrowing to 4%, despite predictions of a sharp rise in inflation. The Governor, Andrew Bailey, speaks to our economics editor about where the economy is heading.
So I think the path is downwards. I think, if you like to stretch the metaphor a bit, I think the course is a bit more uncertain, frankly.
And the UK government unveils plans to crack down on risky cosmetic procedures like Botox injections carried out by unqualified staff. Hello and welcome to Verified Live, and we start with that breaking news that Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting right now with Benjamin Netanyahu pushing for a full-scale occupation of the Gaza Strip. In television interviews broadcast immediately before that meeting started, Israel's Prime Minister confirmed his intention to take over Gaza before handing it over to Arab forces once Hamas has been removed. Well, let's go straight to our Middle East correspondent in Jerusalem, Hugo Bechega. And Hugo, this will be hugely significant if it gets the green light, but also hugely controversial.
Exactly, Matthew. In the last few days, newspapers in Israel have been dominated by the differences between the political leadership and the military leadership, with a very tense exchange between the Prime Minister and the military's Chief of Staff, who said the full occupation of Gaza would be a trap for Israel. It would endanger not only Israeli soldiers, but also the hostages who remain in captivity in Gaza. 20 hostages are believed to be alive, and they are believed to be held in parts of Gaza where the military hasn't yet entered. So Gaza City and also the camps in central parts of Gaza. So now the Prime Minister is defending his plan, very controversial, facing opposition from the military and also from the families of the hostages who have been saying that, military pressure hasn't really been successful in guaranteeing the release of the hostages. They say that the only way here is to negotiate a deal with Hamas. Now, for quite some time, Israeli authorities have been saying that Hamas is not really interested in engaging in negotiations. It is feeling stronger because of the international pressure on Israel. But also at the same time, the Prime Minister is supported by, far-right ministers who have been, defending the idea of fully occupying Gaza, resettling Gaza with Jews and expelling the Palestinian population of Gaza. And I think in this interview to Fox News, very interesting that he decided to give an interview in English to an American news network before this meeting. I think to clarify his points, his plan, he said Israel wasn't planning to annex Gaza and wasn't planning to occupy the territory on a permanent basis.
Hugo Bechega there in Jerusalem. Thanks very much. Well, Hugo was talking about the families of the hostages. I just want to put those live pictures onto the screen because a big crowd of protesters outside of that building where the Security Cabinet is actually meeting, a protest trying to actually make their voice heard. And of course, they, over a number of days, have been urging the Prime Minister not to go ahead with this full-scale occupation of Gaza, talking about the additional risk it poses to the hostages still being held. Of course, around 20 are believed to be still alive there in Gaza, and real alarm from the hostage families at what is being suggested by the Israeli Prime Minister. But that meeting is going on. It is expected to last for a number of hours. It is not a smooth decision. It has been hugely controversial, as Hugo was saying, so I suspect that protest is going to last for some while to come. Well, I've also been talking to Caroline Willman, who's MSF project coordinator in Gaza. She described to me just a short while ago the situation there was apocalyptic and said that it would be potentially impossible to function in terms of humanitarian aid and assistance if Israel does push forward with this new military plan.
In all honesty, it seems unfathomable to me that we need to imagine a situation that can get even worse than the total apocalypse in which we find ourselves already. And it would become extremely difficult, if not potentially impossible, for us to function, given the number of difficulties we already face in the current situation. If there is an intensification even further of hostilities, our work will become extremely difficult, if not impossible.
So you think already it is an apocalyptic situation that could get even worse?
I've been here 6 weeks and I called it apocalyptic from day one and dystopian from day one. And 6 weeks ago, I could not have imagined that now it is already so much worse than it was on the first day that I entered here. So while I don't want to believe it can get worse than this, unfortunately, the reality is that yes, this could happen. It's many, many months that we tell ourselves we have never seen a situation like this. We have never seen anything, a humanitarian situation like this. And every time it got worse.
Tell me a little of what you are currently able to do. And you said in your first answer, you will have to make a judgment whether you can continue to operate. So do you anticipate, if this is green-lit from the Israeli Security Cabinet and we see an enhancement of all those military aspects in the next few days, at what stage do you think you will have to make a decision whether to stay or go?
I mean, obviously, we will be assessing continuously whether the security of our teams can be assured, knowing that in any case, this is a highly, highly insecure context already as it is. Then let's not forget that my Palestinian colleagues have been doing this work throughout genocide for 22 months. They have continued to deliver. So we are absolutely committed to stay. But we anticipate if this plan comes into action, that our work will become even more difficult than it is already.
Just give me a final thought then about levels of starvation that you are seeing and what you are able to do or not able to do.
So we run a primary healthcare center here in Gaza City, where I'm based. The number of patients on our malnutrition program has increased 5-fold since May. These are children younger than 5 years old and pregnant and lactating women. We screen all of the people in these groups when they enter our clinic. 25% of them are malnourished. And also the reason why so many of them while the number of people in that program keeps increasing, is because simply we cannot discharge them from the program. There is not enough food for them to get better, to gain the necessary weight for them to be discharged from the program. So we witness really in what is just a primary healthcare center. We're not in the front line for the most sick, the most malnourished, but we see every day the consequences of the hunger crisis.
And you're having to deal with that on a human level every single day. When you get to the end of the day, just give me an idea of emotionally, on a human level, what that's like.
I mean, once again, I think again and again, I come back to the fact that my Palestinian colleagues have been doing this for 22 months. At the same time, yes, I cannot deny that it is devastating, and we lose words to describe what we are seeing here in the last few weeks. We passed some time with some hope for a ceasefire, and it is again unfathomable to think that not only we lost that hope at the moment for a ceasefire, but we are looking not at a status quo, but a deterioration and a status quo of a situation that is already unbearable. My colleagues are hungry. My colleagues sleep in a tent when they go home after work. Still, they continue doing this work, so we will do the same. But to have to imagine that this will get more difficult rather than that it will become a little bit more bearable is extremely difficult.
Well, that was MSF's Caroline Williman talking to me a little earlier from Gaza. Let me point you to the live page because that meeting of the Security Cabinet, we know it is going on. We've seen the protests outside from the families of the hostages. Do head there. There is an enormous amount of background information and the latest information we will keep across, and anything emerges from that Cabinet meeting, we will obviously return to it. Now, the Kremlin says there'll be a summit in the next few days between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to discuss a possible ceasefire deal in Ukraine. It will be the first time the two men have held face-to-face talks for 7 years, and it comes after President Trump gave Russia an ultimatum to stop the fighting or face new economic sanctions from tomorrow. The White House has said no date or location has been set yet for a meeting. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
All smiles in Moscow as US presidential envoy Steve Witkoff held 3 hours of talks with Vladimir Putin. The aim, to steer Russia towards a ceasefire in Ukraine before new US sanctions are imposed on Friday. Mr. Witkoff is a frequent and welcome visitor to Russia. But the question is, will this lead to a repeat of this? The last Trump-Putin summit was 7 years ago, before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now that war is raging, and Russia is resisting calls for a full ceasefire. The two sides, Russia and Ukraine, both have demands unacceptable to the other. The exchange of POWs is the only thing achieved so far by peace talks. Meanwhile, the death toll continues to rise. India's economy is reeling this week from America's 50% trade tariffs, punishment for India buying Russia's oil. Donald Trump has hinted China could be next for these so-called secondary sanctions. Earlier, President Trump ordered 2 US Navy submarines to move closer to Russia as a warning, but the move was seen as largely performative. Both Putin and Trump want to normalize US-Russia relations, but Trump has signaled impatience with Putin's refusal to compromise. So, even if the two leaders do meet, that's still a long way from a breakthrough in ending the war in Ukraine. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Well, joining me now is our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale. He's there live for us in Dnipro, and in Washington is our North America correspondent, Nomia Iqbal. Nomia, I'll start with you. How is the White House viewing any face-to-face meeting here?
Well, the White House has, long wanted to have some sort of meeting with Vladimir Putin. I mean, President Trump was talking about it at the start of his presidency as well, and it was all vague. I would say it still is pretty vague. I mean, we're talking about in the coming days, there's no real kind of set location, and we don't even know if President Zelensky will agree to it. We don't know what the topics will be. Of course, the ultimate objective is to try and end the war in Ukraine. But I think what's interesting is that President Trump has started to become a lot more cautious. Last month, he gave an interview to the BBC in which he'd said that he has been disappointed with Vladimir Putin many, many times. He's also shown that he's a bit he made a comment to a reporter back in April showing that he's also a bit cynical. He did say that he couldn't really tell if President Putin was stringing him along. But having said all of that, he is frustrated that there's no peace deal. We know that he's set this deadline for Friday, threatens sweeping sanctions on Russia if a ceasefire isn't delivered. But we'll see what happens once we get more details from the White House, exactly what this summit, where it will be and who will attend and what they hope to achieve.
Nomi, I'll be back to you in a moment, but let's go to Jonathan. And Jonathan, President Zelensky has long wanted to have a face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin. That's always been dismissed by the Kremlin. In terms of how Kyiv are viewing any sort of summit, take me through it.
Well, I think essentially Kyiv wants to please Donald Trump and to support his efforts, because without American support, Ukraine will be at sea. They need American military support, even if it's being supplied through European countries buying American equipment. They need those sanctions. So we're going to hear lots of positive noises from President Zelensky about what Donald Trump is doing. As you say, President Zelensky himself has made it very clear that he wants a meeting with President Putin for some time. He says Russia shouldn't be afraid of a meeting too. The problem is that there's no sign that President Putin wants to have that meeting. He says he's willing to consider it, but certain conditions must be met. He's not saying what those conditions are. So I don't think there's a lot of trust on both sides. President Zelensky wants a European presence at any meetings that will take place. He also says don't let President Putin, Russia, deceive on details, but he does want this meeting. I should say there is just one report in the New York Post saying that it's possible that Donald Trump won't have a meeting with President Putin unless he is willing to meet President Zelensky. That is just one source saying that at the moment, but clearly the hope in the White House is that President Zelensky at some stage, even if it's not the initial meeting between President Putin and President Trump, will be involved.
Jonathan, thanks very much. Let's go back to Washington. Nomir, I was talking to a former US ambassador to Ukraine only in the last hour who talked about the danger for the administration of Donald Trump being played again. And he said the first acid test of that is whether actually they would impose sanctions tomorrow. So he was watching very, very closely. And that's the worry, isn't it, that, again, Vladimir Putin simply could be doing all of this to buy more time.
I think there is a sense here in Washington politically that the Trump administration really undermines just how much Vladimir Putin wants to continue this war, why this war is significant to him. I mean, Donald Trump is a transactional president. Vladimir Putin arguably isn't. And so if there is an incentive that Donald Trump has to give Vladimir Putin to stop the war, what is it? What is that incentive? I mean, in terms of the sweeping sanctions, we don't exactly know what they would look like, but bear in mind, Russia is already hugely sanctioned by the US. And there's an argument to say that any more sanctions could be much of a muchness. They might not make much impact. I mean, Donald Trump is targeting countries that do business with Russia. He slapped those tariffs on India up to 50%. But interestingly, he didn't do it to China. I mean, China buys more gas from Russia than India does. But I think Donald Trump is sort of being strategic and being careful about it. But Donald Trump, as I mentioned before himself, did say back in April that he wasn't quite sure if Vladimir Putin is stringing him along, but he does want to end the war. Remember, he said he would end it on the first day in office. I mean, it's obviously hyperbole, but it is a goal that he has. There is pressure on him to try and achieve that.
All right, Nomir Iqbal there in Washington. Thanks to you, and thanks earlier to Jonathan Beale. More on our headline stories here in a moment. We'll be talking about interest rates in the UK, but around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Now, the Bank of England has cut interest rates today by 1/4 of a percentage point to 4%, bringing the cost of borrowing to its lowest level for more than 2 years. Its governor, Andrew Bailey, said it had been a finely balanced decision and that any future cuts would need to be made gradually and carefully. Well, he sat down with our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
The markets have interpreted today's move as saying, well, maybe there isn't definitely going to be a further rate cut this year. Is that right? Is the path definitely still downwards?
So I think the path is downwards. I think, if you like to stretch the metaphor a bit, I think the course is a bit more uncertain, frankly. So, in other words, what do I mean by that? Well, the timing, whether we'll be cutting at this meeting or that meeting, and I think you see that in markets. I think markets are also reflecting their pricing, the fact there is genuine uncertainty, and that reflects the fact it's a finely balanced decision. So I think that's probably for the moment the right place to be.
Well, we'll play you that full interview with Andrew Bailey here in about 15-20 minutes' time. Well, the move, though, will reduce monthly mortgage costs for some homeowners, but it also means smaller returns for savers, as our Deputy Economics Editor, Darshini David, now reports.
From prisons to sports pitches, there's no shortage of custom for this steel fence maker in Wolverhampton. But lead design engineer Adam also has to safeguard his own finances. With his 5-year fixed mortgage deal expiring, he faces higher repayments.
It's a bit of a jump, so it's gone up from about £900 to just over £1,000. So yeah, just slightly over 10% increase. But we thought it was going to be more like a £200-300 increase. But luckily, we were able to find a good deal.
The issue for Adam and many others is that despite recent cuts, rates remain higher than a few years ago. His boss, too, is trying to nail things down as the company faces hurdles to its own finances and plans.
For a company of our size with 60 employees, the combined effect was around about £120,000 in the year, which is a big hit for us. Partly because a lot of our competition is foreign-based, so we're trying to manufacture in the UK, but we're fighting against companies in Turkey, China, who probably haven't had those sort of increases. So it's a constant battle to become more and more efficient, almost just to stand still.
So the bank faces a dilemma. Its primary job is to get inflation down to the 2% target and keep it there. But it's currently 3.6%. It may remain around that level for some time. On the other hand, it's got to be mindful of the wider economy. And it's particularly being concerned about the jobs market. Unemployment is at a 4-year high of 4.7%. Many businesses are claiming that higher taxes and other policies are having an effect there. And it's those concerns about the wider economy and the longer-term implications for inflation that swung the bank's decision today.
At this meeting, the Monetary Policy Committee judged that a further 0.25 percentage points reduction in bank rate was appropriate. Based on the outlook for inflation, a gradual and careful approach to the further withdrawal of monetary policy restraint remains appropriate.
The bank's decision will give a lift to businesses and some mortgage holders, although it will weigh heavily on savers. And as uncertainty over our prospects continue, it may be a while until we see rates being trimmed again.
Darshini David, let's talk tariffs, because Donald Trump's long-threatened tariffs have taken effect today on imports from dozens of countries across the world, raising the effective US rate to its highest levels in nearly a century. With numerous exceptions and conditions, many governments and businesses remain confused about the final rates that will actually be charged. Well, Donald Trump has promised even more tariffs, including a 100% levy on semiconductors imported into the US, and has doubled tariffs on India for continuing to buy Russian oil, a move India has called unfair and unjustified. Well, from Mumbai, our correspondent Archana Shukla gave me more about how India is responding.
Well, the stance here in New Delhi has been a bit more staunch, where New Delhi has held its ground, calling these new additional tariffs as unjustified and unreasonable, defending its purchase of Russian crude, saying it's crucial for India's energy security and to make energy affordable for the 1.4 billion Indians, and also saying that India has been singled out at a time when other countries like European Union or even United States continue to do trade with Russia, and they would be taking all steps possible. We know that the sticking points here are twofold. One in India is definitely the Russian oil imports, but the other is also India's reluctance to open up its agriculture and dairy markets. Sticking points on which the earlier trade ties, trade conversations stalled, and after which the relationship has been strained. So how the negotiations go from here on would be closely watched out for by both businesses and the stock markets. Today in the morning, Prime Minister Modi in a conference indicated, not directly talking about tariffs, but said that they would do everything to keep the interests of farmers in check and protect the interests of farmers here, somewhere signaling that those could be non-negotiable areas in larger trade talks. But how this progresses is really something that both businesses and the markets are watching.
Well, let's look at the wider tariffs. Let me show you the live pictures from Philadelphia, the port there, because a lot of concern there in America that they may be seeing the economy slowing down. Our North America business correspondent Michelle Fleury spoke to me a little earlier and had this assessment from New York.
The market reaction has been surprisingly muted. I mean, I guess in some ways investors have got to the point where they're used to Donald Trump sort of laying out very tough tariffs and then later on negotiating whether it's carve-outs or lowering the rates. And so I think they've sort of come to the expectation that, you know, while we're seeing a lot of disruption, they aren't too concerned at the moment.
Michelle Fleury in New York. That brings us to the end of this section of Verified Live. We are keeping an eye on that Security Cabinet meeting in Israel, the families of the hostages outside of that building protesting. So we'll bring you more as we get it here on BBC News. But that meeting has been going on for an hour or so. But you're right up to date here on Verified Live.
Now on BBC News, the biggest African and international news stories. Focus on Africa.
Welcome to Focus on Africa on BBC News, coming to you live from Nairobi. Our top stories. Sudan's army claims that they've blown up an Emirati aircraft carrying at least 40 Colombian mercenaries, something the UAE denies. Meanwhile, Zambia has refuted any threat to public health, a day after the United States warned its citizens to leave an area near February's toxic waste spillage. Also coming up in the program, we hear from the UK opposition leader, Kemi Badenoch, who recently said she no longer identifies as Nigerian.
We had a lot of people in our lives who got rich from, cheating the system, corruption, and my mum and dad said, we don't do that.
And church, but not as you know it. We'll meet the Nigerian deaf Christians who are signing rather than singing their worship. This is Focus on Africa. Thanks for your time. I'm Wahiga Mwaura. Now, the United Arab Emirates has denied a claim by Sudan state television that the military has destroyed an Emirati aircraft carrying at least 40 Colombian mercenaries in the southwest of the country. While the BBC has not been able to independently verify this, a military source told AFP that the plane was bombed and completely destroyed at Darfur's Nyala airport. The state TV said the aircraft had taken off from an airbase in the Gulf, carrying dozens of foreign fighters and military equipment intended for the RSF, which controls nearly all of Darfur. There was no immediate comment from the RSF. However, Colombia's President Gustavo Petro said in a tweet that his government was trying to find out how many of his country's nationals died in this particular attack. Well, reports of Colombian fighters in Darfur date back to late last year and have been confirmed by United Nations experts. So, how do Colombian nationals end up fighting in Sudan? Well, back in 2016, the then Colombian government signed a peace deal with the Revolution of Armed Forces in Colombia, the largest rebel group in the country. Since then, there have been reports of former rebel fighters being recruited in foreign wars such as in Ukraine and Sudan. Indeed, President Petro has called for mercenarism to be made illegal in Colombia in a bid to prevent the country's citizens from being paid to fight in foreign wars. The BBC's Jose Carlos Cueto Lopez has been following up on this story and brings us the latest updates from Bogota.
Well, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, reacted very quickly to the news yesterday of that alleged claim by the Sudanese armed forces that they had knocked down a UAE plane where some Colombians were there. He reacted to the news and he instructed to the Colombian embassy in El Cairo to investigate what has been happening, how many Colombians were involved in this attack. But we're still waiting for the proper confirmation either from the government or from the foreign ministry. The foreign ministry usually makes comments very quickly on these sort of events, but so far has not commented on what allegedly happened yesterday that we haven't been able to confirm.
I believe you've been investigating this matter for some time now, since last year. Is there any sense of the numbers of Colombian mercenaries that could be in Sudan?
It is quite difficult to obtain the real numbers of these because the closest office that the Colombian diplomacy has in this region of the world is in El Cairo. So for the authorities to access what's going on in Sudan and to get a real sense of how many Colombian ex-military are participating in the conflict, it's very difficult. So we have had to rely in local reports from local media. For example, local media La Silla Vacía indicates a report by them back in December that there could be as many as 300 Colombians involved in the conflict. That's a figure that the BBC could not verify independently. But when we asked about this figure to experts who have studied and are studying this phenomenon, they deemed this figure as likely. So through second-hand sources, we have been able to confirm that at least dozens of Colombians have been involved in the Sudanese civil war after spending some time in the UAE without necessarily knowing that because they went to the UAE, they were going to be finally destined to fight in the Sudanese civil war.
I mean, how do these Colombian mercenaries end up in the UAE to begin with? And what does that tell us about Colombia's relationship with the UAE?
Well, the relationship in terms of security cooperation between Colombia and the UAE dates back to the decade of 2010. Back then, the UAE army was hiring ex-military from Colombia to train in the UAE and for those sort of activities. The situation now seems to be quite different. Colombia has a huge stock of retired soldiers because of the conflict in Colombia. And then many of these many of these soldiers have retired very young, in their early 40s, with low pensions. So they need to find a good source of income. And because of relationships between and networks between ex-military, they find offers that pretty much advertise in WhatsApp groups where they are, for example, offered a security job for a security private company in the UAE that can pay them around $2,000. Many of them take them, and according to the reports, they are promised low-risk security jobs, for example, working as a private guard for an oil refinery in the UAE, without knowing that then they're going to be destined to fight in the Sudanese civil war. That seemed to have happened in the past as well with conflicts, for example, in Gulf and in the Gulf, as in Yemen, for example. But the UAE has always denied any involvement in this process in which they promise the low-risk security job in the UAE, and then they end up fighting in a war that they were not averted for.
Elsewhere, the UK opposition leader Kemi Badenoch recently caused controversy by saying she no longer identifies as Nigerian. The Conservative Party politician was born in London to Nigerian parents, but grew up both in Nigeria and the United States. Speaking on the Rosebud podcast, she said she was Nigerian by ancestry, but not by identity. Badenoch, who returned to England aged 16, says she no longer renews her Nigerian passport. Last year, she faced criticism from Nigeria's Vice President, Kashim Shettima, who said she had denigrated the West African country after saying she had grown up in fear and insecurity at a time that Nigeria was plagued by corruption. She's been speaking to the BBC's Amol Rajan.
In preparation for this interview, I rewatched your maiden speech in Parliament, and you talked about growing up in Nigeria as an oil boom baby. There was a big oil boom in Nigeria. And there were also military coups. I think there was in 1983 and 1985, there were big changes to the system there.
Growing up in Nigeria, I saw real poverty. I experienced it. Living without electricity, doing my homework by candlelight because the state electricity board couldn't provide power. Fetching water from a borehole a mile away in heavy, rusty buckets because the nationalised water company couldn't get water out of the taps. I was unlucky enough to live under socialist policies. It is not something I would wish on anyone, and that's just one of the reasons why I am a Conservative.
One of the main points of your maiden speech was the experience of loss. So born into a middle-class family, your dad was a doctor, your mum was a lecturer, and then your circumstances took a hit. What happened?
So, various things happened. The economy was managed by a government that didn't call itself socialist, but had lots of socialist ideals and ideas.
They controlled the economy.
Yeah, just pretty much full control of the economy, capital controls, fixed currency, etc. But the other reason was because The country itself is a low-trust country. It's very multicultural, so lots of different groups. You know, there is proper diversity in a way that many people don't recognize in the UK. Everybody looks the same, but different languages, different types of clothing, different customs. And actually, when you have